Little MAGA girl was crying after Leftist humiliated her at Starbucks. Then a wee veteran ran in left, everyone in shock when. Subscribe to the channel right now to find out the end of this epic story and comment below which part of this great America you are watching from. That autumn Saturday morning had dawned with a promise of serenity, the golden sun bathing the tree-lined streets of the city in a warm, welcoming light, typical of those days when America seems to breathe at peace with itself. However, for Diana, a teenager of just 14, the air was about to become dense, cold and suffocating, charged with an invisible hostility that she, in her youthful innocence, could never have predicted. Diana was not an ordinary girl by the standards of that progressive, cosmopolitan neighborhood. She was a rare flower of patriotism blooming in a garden of ideological concrete. With her golden curls falling softly over her shoulders and big blue eyes reflecting genuine kindness, she carried a heritage of values that many her age had been taught to despise or forget. On that specific day, Diana had decided to wear her identity with a silent but fervent pride. She wore a simple white t-shirt, but emblazoned in the center was the glorious American flag, vibrant in red, white, and blue. And, crowning her head, a bright red cap with the inscription MAGA in white capital letters. For her, that hat wasn't just a political accessory or a declaration of culture war. It was a sacred tribute, a bond of love and respect for her grandfather, a man who had taught her about freedom, about sacrifice, and about the greatness of a nation built under God. As she walked down the sidewalk, clutching her colorful school backpack against her chest, Diana felt light. She was on her way to the library to study history, her favorite subject, but first, her stomach called for a sweet comfort. The famous coffee shop on the corner, part of a massive global franchise known for its coffee and, unfortunately, for its overly politicized corporate culture, was just ahead. The green siren logo glowed in the window, promising warmth and caffeine. Diana hesitated for a brief second at the heavy glass door. She knew instinctively that this wasn't exactly her territory. At school, she had already felt the sideways glances from some teachers and the distancing of classmates who parroted slogans they saw on the internet. But she never imagined that the simple act of buying a hot cocoa could turn into a trial by fire. Taking a deep breath and adjusting the brim of her red hat with determination, she pushed the door and entered, unaware that she was crossing the border into a battlefield where her innocence would be the first casualty. The interior of the coffee shop was a sharp contrast to the world outside. The air conditioning was set to a frigid temperature, and the atmosphere was saturated with the strong aroma of roasted coffee beans and artificial syrups. Melancholic indie music whispered through the space, competing with the low murmur of intellectual conversations and the frantic typing on expensive laptops. The place was packed. There were grad students reviewing theses on social theories, digital nomads with noise-cancelling headphones, and groups of friends discussing the latest trends in online activism. As soon as Diana took her first steps toward the line, the coffee shop's ecosystem reacted to her presence like a body rejecting a transplant. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A head turning, a gaze lingering a little longer than polite. A whisper that ceased abruptly, but as she advanced, the atmosphere shifted from indifference to an electric, palpable tension. Diana felt the change on her skin. The hairs on her arms stood up, not from the cold AC, but from the human coldness radiating from the surrounding tables. She tried to keep her gaze fixed on the menu above the counter, pretending not to notice the eyes drilling into her. She could feel the judgment weighing on her shoulders, a physical pressure trying to make her shrink, diminish, disappear. "Look at that!" She heard a strident whisper coming from a table to her left, where two young people in deconstructed fashion stared at her with undisguised scorn. How do her parents let her go out like that? It's offensive." The comment, spoken loud enough for her to hear, made Diana's face burn. Her cheeks, naturally rosy, flushed a vivid red, matching her hat. The little MAGA girl's heart began to beat out of rhythm. She was just a child. She wasn't there to debate foreign policy, nor to protest anything. She just wanted a moment of sweetness on her Saturday. The injustice of that preemptive treatment began to form a knot in her throat. Why did love for her country provoke such hate in these people? The line in front of her dwindled, and Diana found herself increasingly exposed. She looked around, searching for some sign of empathy, a kind smile, anything that told her she was still welcome as a human being. But what she found was a sea of passive-aggressive hostility. A man in a suit rolled his eyes and shook his head in disapproval upon noticing the flag on her shirt. A woman reading a book on social revolution slammed the cover shut and crossed her arms, staring at Diana as if the girl were a contagious disease. The isolation was absolute. Diana felt small, an island of red, white, and blue surrounded by a grey ocean of ideological conformity. She thought about taking off the hat, stowing it in her backpack, and hiding. But her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. "Never be ashamed of who you are, honey. Courage is standing up when the world wants you to kneel." Gripping her backpack strapped so tightly her knuckles turned white, she stood firm, though her legs trembled slightly beneath her pink tulle skirt. Finally, it was her turn. Diana approached the counter, forcing a shy, polite smile, hoping that courtesy might disarm the tension. But what awaited her on the other side of the espresso machine wasn't just bad service. It was the embodiment of the ideological fury she had, until then, only seen on the news. The barista, who was back-turned cleaning a filter, pivoted slowly. She was a young woman, perhaps in her 20s, but her eyes carried a cynical weariness and a latent anger. Her hair was dyed an aggressive neon orange, shaved on the sides, and her face was a constellation of metal piercings. She wore the store's green apron, but it was adorned with various buttons featuring radical political slogans and symbols of far-left causes. When the barista's eyes landed on Diana, or rather, on Diana's MAGA hat, time seemed to stop. There was no procedural good morning or what can I get you. There was only a heavy silence, loaded with contempt. The barista looked the girl up and down, analyzing the flag t-shirt, the hat, the innocence stamped on Diana's face, and her upper lip curled in a sneer of disgust. Diana swallowed hard, feeling fear begin to replace her discomfort. That look wasn't just disapproval, it was hate, an irrational, deep and dangerous hate. "Hi." Diana's voice came out as a cracked whisper, almost inaudible. "I'd like a large hot cocoa with whipped cream, please." She tried to maintain normalcy, acting as if she weren't being judged for her very existence. The barista didn't move to register the order. She remained static, hands resting on the counter, leaning forward like a predator cornering prey. The silence in the shop deepened. Conversations around them ceased completely. All the customers, who before were only whispering, now watched openly, waiting for the spectacle. They wouldn't intervene. They were the complicit audience of that theater of cruelty. Diana's vulnerability in that moment was total. She was alone, without parents, without friends, surrounded by strangers who saw her as an enemy symbol, not a child. The smell of coffee now seemed nauseating. The sunlight coming through the window felt cold. She felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, but fought to hold them back. She didn't want to cry in front of them. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. But the pressure was crushing. The barista, the radical leftist, finally took a deep breath, not to calm down, but to fill her lungs with the air of her own twisted righteousness. She didn't see a 14-year-old girl asking for chocolate. She saw an opportunity to signal her virtue, to fight the system, to punish what she considered evil incarnate. And Diana, standing there with her red hat and her patriotic heart, was the perfect target for all the accumulated frustration of that activist. The stage was set. The victim was isolated and exposed. The aggressor was armed with her ideology and the silent approval of the crowd. And Diana's world was about to crumble. The silence hanging over the coffee shop counter wasn't one of peace, but the harbinger of a devastating storm. Diana remained paralyzed, her small hands clutching the cold edge of the faux marble counter, her fingers turning white from the pressure. She expected to hear the price of the hot cocoa, expected the usual sound of the cash register, but what she received was a laugh. Not a laugh of joy or camaraderie, but a dry, cutting sound, devoid of any humanity, which emanated from the barista's throat with the violence of shattering glass. The woman, with neon orange hair, tilted her head to the side, making her heavy earrings jingle, and a smile of cruel mockery curved her black-painted lips. The customer service mask fell completely, revealing the true, twisted face of the ideological fanaticism seething beneath the surface. "Do you really think we're going to serve someone like you here?" The barista's voice started low, vibrating with contained venom, designed to humiliate intimately before exploding publicly. She crossed her arms over the green apron, where buttons reading "Smash the Patriarchy and Eat the Rich" gleamed under the artificial lights. Her eyes, outlined in heavy, smudged makeup, fixed on Diana's wide blue eyes with predatory intensity. "Look at you. Look at what you're wearing. Aren't you ashamed to walk around carrying symbols of hate? Don't you feel the weight of oppression in that little head of yours washed by propaganda?" Diana blinked, stunned, as if she had been physically slapped. The world around her seemed to spin in slow motion. The smell of burnt coffee suddenly became nauseating. Sorry?" She stammered, her voice shaking, desperately trying to find logic in those accusations. "I just asked for a hot cocoa. I have money. Look." She tried to pull a crumpled $5 bill from the pocket of her tulle skirt, a childish and innocent gesture that, anywhere else, would have been received with tenderness. But there, in that temple of radical progressivism, it was the fuse for the explosion. The barista slammed her open hand on the counter with a bang that made everyone in the store jump. "Keep your dirty money," she shouted. And now there were no more whispers. She was performing for the audience. Her voice rose several octaves, filling every corner of the establishment with her righteous, manufactured fury. "We don't want your capitalist money here. We don't serve fascists. We don't feed the system that you and your disgusting family represent." She pointed a long finger, with chipped black nail polish, directly at Diana's face, invading her personal space, violating her safety. "You come in here, into our safe space, with that damn red hat, with that flag that represents genocide and racism, and think you can just act like a normal person. You're not normal, girl. You are the problem. You are the cancer of this country." The words were like stones being thrown against a fragile window pane. Diana took a step back, bumping into a shelf of expensive mugs. Cold fear took over her gut. She looked around, desperate for help, for any adult to intervene and tell that woman she was crazy, that this was wrong. But what Diana saw destroyed the rest of her faith in those people. The customers, those woke youths with their laptops and oat milk lattes, weren't horrified by the aggression. They were delighted. Many had whipped out their smartphones. Camera lenses pointed directly at Diana's tear-stained face. A camera flash went off, then another. They were filming. They were documenting her humiliation, not to save her, but to feed her to the wolves of social media. She could hear the muffled comments and mean snickers coming from the tables. "Look at her face," mocked a guy in a punk band t-shirt, little Karen in training. "Gonna cry to Daddy Trump now?" The sensation of being under siege was total. Diana felt like a cornered animal. "Please." she sobbed, the first hot tears finally overflowing and running down her flushed cheeks. "I didn't do anything. This is my grandpa's hat. He fought for the country. I love America." Her defense was pure, coming from the depths of a heart that only knew love for her homeland. But for the leftist activist, those words were like gasoline on a fire. The mention of love for America triggered an even greater fit of rage in the aggressor. "Love for America?" The barista repeated the phrase with a tone of theatrical scorn, coming out from behind the counter and advancing into the customer area. She marched toward Diana like a general of an army of hate. "There is no America to love, you ignorant idiot. There is only stolen land. There is only imperialism. Your grandfather was probably a killer, just like all those who wear that uniform and that flag." The cruelty of those words hit Diana in the most painful place. Her grandfather, the kindest man she knew, being called a killer by a stranger who knew nothing of honor or sacrifice. "Stop! Please stop yelling at me!" Diana begged, shrinking away, hugging her own backpack as if it were a shield. She wanted to run, wanted to get out of there and never come back. But her legs felt made of lead, and the barista blocked the path to the door, using her body to intimidate the girl. The orange-haired woman seemed to grow, feeding off the child's vulnerability and the silent approval of the digital mob filming everything. "I won't stop until you understand what trash you are," the barista bellowed, her face now inches from Diana's, spitting droplets of rage. "You have no right to be here. You have no right to display that symbol of hate in front of me. This is violence. Your hat is violence against me and against all the oppressed people I represent." The inversion of values was complete and mind-boggling. The adult woman screaming and threatening a crying child called the girl's fabric hat violence. It was the twisted logic of the radical left in its purest and most toxic form, the victimization of the aggressor. The activist looked around, seeking validation, and found it. "Get her out of here," yelled a woman with thick glasses in the back of the store. "Fascists shall not pass," echoed another customer, raising a fist. Emboldened by the crowd, the barista felt invincible. She grabbed an empty paper cup that was on a nearby table and crushed it violently in her hand, throwing it on the floor at Diana's feet. The sound of the paper being smashed was loud in the tense silence. "I'm going to give you a choice, MAGA girl," hissed the barista, her voice dropping to a menacing, dangerous tone. "Either you take that hat off right now, throw it in the trash where it belongs, and apologize on your knees for offending this space, or I'll rip it off your head myself and throw it in the street. And I guarantee you won't like how I do it." The air left Diana's lungs. The humiliation had reached its peak. Apologize for loving her country? Throw away her grandfather's gift? Kneel before that irrational tyranny? Everything inside her screamed, "No!" But the fear was overwhelming. She was shaking uncontrollably now. Her sobs were audible. Broken sounds of a childhood being brutalized by adult politics. She looked at the glass door, seeing the sun outside like a distant memory of freedom. Inside, in the shadows of woke ideology, there was no freedom, only submission. I can't," Diana whispered, her voice strangled by crying. "It's my country. I have the right." "Right?" The barista exploded again, now completely beside herself. "You have no rights here. Your freedom of speech ends where my feelings begin, and you disgust me." The woman raised her hand, and for a terrible second, Diana thought she would be physically struck. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the blow, hunching her shoulders, an image of absolute helplessness that should have broken the heart of any decent person. But at Starbucks, decency had been replaced by dogma. The tension in the air was solid, unbreathable. The little MAGA girl was broken, isolated, surrounded by enemies laughing at her pain, under the shadow of an aggressor who saw herself as a moral heroine while psychologically torturing a child. Diana's despair hit its maximum. She felt no one would come for her, that she was alone against the mad world. The barista took one more step forward, hand outstretched to grab the brim of the red hat, ready to commit the final act of desecration. Evil seemed about to triumph, laughing in the face of innocence. But destiny and the old soul of America had other plans for that Saturday morning. Time seemed to have dissolved into a thick, terrifying sludge inside that coffee shop. The orange-haired activist's arm was outstretched, her claw-like fingers descending toward Diana's head like the blade of a guillotine, ready to execute the final sentence against freedom. The girl, eyes closed and face bathed in tears, cringed, awaiting the violent yank. The physical humiliation of having her symbol of identity ripped away and profaned before a crowd of strangers watching with sadistic, digital pleasure. The acrid smell of nervous sweat and the static electricity of hate filled the air. The barista smiled, anticipating the triumph of her social justice, feeling like the very incarnation of revolution as she attacked an unarmed child. The silence in the shop was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerators and the muffled sobs of the little MAGA girl. It seemed evil had won, that the darkness of modern intolerance had finally swallowed the last light of patriotic innocence. But then the universe reacted. It wasn't just the door chime that rang, it was a collision. The front door of the Starbucks was thrown open with a force and urgency that made the glass rattle in its frame. The sound that followed wasn't the soft tread of designer sneakers or the shuffle of flip-flops, but the rhythmic, heavy, authoritative thud of polished military boots against the wooden floor, accompanied by the firm, percussive tap-tap of a solid wooden cane. A gust of fresh wind swept in, dissipating the stale air of confined ideology. Every gaze, including the aggressors, was ripped from the crying girl and cast toward the entrance. And what they saw made the blood in their veins freeze and the irony die in their throats. There he stood, a silhouette against the midday light, looking larger than life, larger than time. An elderly man, yes, with the marks of 9 decades etched into his face like maps of a world that woke generation would never understand. But his posture defied biology. His back was straight as a bayonet. His broad shoulders bore the weight of history with imperial dignity. He wore his full-dress uniform, an impeccable midnight blue without a single crease out of place, preserved with the reverence of one keeping a holy relic. On his chest, over a heart that still beat with the vigor of 1944, rested a blinding constellation of medals, the Silver Star, the Purple Heart, the Legion of Honor. They clinked softly with his movement, a metallic music that sounded like bells tolling for freedom. He wasn't just an elderly man. He was a living monument, a World War II veteran, one of the last titans to walk the earth. His eyes, grey and piercing as battleship steel, swept the scene in milliseconds, assessing the threat, identifying the enemy, locating the victim. The barista froze, her hand still hovering in the air, ridiculous and suspended. The sight of that man was an anaphylactic shock to her system. He represented everything she had been taught to hate: tradition, militarism, masculinity, authority, but faced with his physical, overwhelming presence, her academic theories disintegrated. "Get away from her!" The order wasn't shouted, it was thundered. The veteran's voice emerged from his chest like a cannon shot, deep, gravelly, and saturated with an authority one doesn't learn in universities, but forges in the fire of combat. The sound reverberated off the coffee shop walls, making cups rattle on the tables. It wasn't a request, it was an absolute command of nature. Propelled by righteous fury, the old warrior moved with surprising speed for his age, ignoring the pain in his knees, driven by the sacred duty to protect the innocent. In 3 long strides, he closed the distance between the door and the counter, physically positioning himself between Diana and the activist. He slammed the metal tip of his cane onto the floor with a violent crack, creating an insurmountable barrier. The little MAGA girl, feeling the shift in energy, opened her eyes and saw, through her tears, the back of that protective giant, the dark blue fabric of the uniform blocking the view of the mean woman. The barista, recovering from the initial fright, tried to summon her habitual arrogance. She straightened her posture, crossing her arms again, trying to look bigger than she was before that moral colossus. "Who do you think you are?" she hissed, her voice faltering slightly, losing the strident strength from before. "You can't come in here yelling. This is a safe space. You are violating community guidelines." The veteran turned slowly to face her. He didn't yell back immediately. He just looked at her. A look of contempt so deep, so loaded with disappointment and judgment that the woman instinctively stepped back. "Safe space," he repeated, the words leaving his mouth with palpable disgust. "I see a grown woman terrorizing a helpless child. I see a mob of cowards filming a girl's suffering instead of helping her. The only safe place here is the one you created for your own inflated ego." He took a step forward, forcing the barista to retreat further, cornering her against the espresso machine. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The predator was now the prey. "You speak of fascism, miss?" he continued, his voice rising in volume, filling the shop and silencing even the ambient music. He pointed a gloved finger at her face, the white leather of the glove contrasting with the moral filth of the situation. "I looked real fascism in the eye on the beaches of Normandy. I watched my best friends get cut in half by German machine guns to stop the tyranny you pretend to fight. I smelled the concentration camps where true oppression happened, and let me tell you something, the only fascist in this room is you." A collective gasp ran through the coffee shop. The word fascist, used so loosely by the left, was returned with the weight of an anvil. The barista opened her mouth, stammering, her face turning red, not from shame, but from impotent indignation. You're an old white man. You don't understand. She supports Trump. She's a racist. Her hat is a symbol of hate." She tried to recite her script, but the words sounded hollow and hysterical against reality. "Silence!" the veteran roared, cutting her off. "That hat is a piece of fabric. The flag on her shirt is the symbol of the republic for which I bled. We fought so you could have the right to have that ridiculous hair, to say the nonsense you say, and to live without fear of the Gestapo knocking on your door. But that same freedom protects her." He pointed to Diana, who was now clutching his pant leg, seeking refuge. "It protects her right to love her president, to love her country, and to have a damn hot cocoa without being attacked by a fanatic like you." He turned to the audience, to the young people with their phones. "And you?" he challenged, his eyes burning. "You call yourselves men, citizens, watching a girl cry and doing nothing? You are the shame of the generation that built this world. Put those phones down now." The shame was instant and corrosive. Hands lowered. Phones were stowed away. Some customers, unable to sustain the veteran's gaze, looked at the floor. The moral truth was undeniable. The coffee shop's bubble of distorted reality had burst. The barista, seeing she had lost the audience and control, tried her last card, the coward's favorite tactic: institutional victimization. I feel threatened," she screamed, looking at the ceiling as if speaking to a corporate deity. "Manager, this man is being aggressive. He's attacking me. I'm going to call the police. I'm going to post this on Twitter and get all of you cancelled." The store manager, a short, nervous man who had watched everything hiding behind a swinging door, finally emerged, pale as wax. He looked at the hysterical barista, then at the imposing veteran with his medals shining, and then at the terrified girl. The choice was between the ideological insanity of his employee and the basic human decency represented by the war hero. "Sir!" the manager began, voice trembling. The veteran didn't give him a chance to falter. He snapped his head toward the manager. Your employee just committed harassment, intimidation, and discrimination against a minor under your roof. If you don't resolve this right now, I guarantee you, son, the police will be called, but I'll be the one making the call. And I'll bring the American Legion, the veterans of foreign wars, and every patriot in this city to shut this establishment down before sunset. The threat wasn't of violence. It was of civic justice. The manager swallowed hard, sweat dripping down his forehead. He knew the veteran meant business. He looked at the barista. Jessica, go to the office, now, he ordered, his voice rising an octave. But the barista started to protest, incredulous. Now, screamed the manager, you crossed the line. Get out of the customer's sight. The activist, defeated, humiliated, and exposed, let out an inarticulate cry of frustration. She cast one last look of pure hate at the veteran and Diana, a look that promised future revenge, online cancellation, doxing, all the weapons of the modern weak, before ripping off her apron and throwing it on the floor, marching to the back of the store, slamming the door hard. The immediate physical threat had vanished, but the poison she had spread still hung in the air. The victory had been won in that moment, but the culture war everyone knew was far from over. With the villain removed, the rigid tension in the veteran's body dissipated slightly. He let out the air he was holding, shoulders relaxing a millimeter. He turned slowly downward, where Diana was still huddled, trembling like a leaf in the wind. The old warrior's face, previously a mask of martial fury, transformed. The hard lines around his eyes softened into an expression of infinite tenderness. The same expression he might have used upon seeing children liberated in the villages of France in 1944. He knelt with difficulty, joints popping in protest, to be at her eye level. He ignored the pain. The emotional rescue mission was more important. With a large hand, calloused and spotted by age, but incredibly gentle, he touched Diana's shoulder. "It's all right now, little one," he whispered, his raspy voice now sounding like a warm embrace. "The monster is gone. You're safe. I'm here." Diana looked up, seeing the shine of the medals, the blue of the uniform, and above all, the kindness in his grey eyes. The dam of fear broke, and she threw herself into his arms, burying her face in his chest covered in decorations, sobbing uncontrollably, releasing all the pain, humiliation, and terror she had felt. The veteran held her firmly, stroking her golden hair while looking at the rest of the shop over her head, a warning look to anyone who dared disturb that moment. He was the shield, the sword, and the shelter. But as he consoled the girl, he knew the world outside was becoming increasingly hostile to souls like hers. The battle was won, but the cost of lost innocence was too high. The embrace between the old soldier and the young patriot lasted as long as necessary for the world to spin back to its correct moral axis. In that enclave of cold modernity and digital cynicism, the scene looked like a Norman Rockwell painting brought to life, vibrant and defiant. The navy blue of the Leftist uniform, protecting the pink tool of childhood, united under the invisible but indestructible aegis of American values. When the veteran finally pulled away, he didn't do it abruptly. He held Diana by the shoulders with his large, firm hands, looking her in the eye with affectionate seriousness. He pulled a white linen handkerchief from his inside jacket pocket, impeccably folded, with the initials USMC embroidered in faded gold thread. "Dry those eyes, soldier," he said, his voice a soft rumble that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. "Tears are the price we pay for pain, but don't let them see it as weakness. You have the strength of an entire nation inside you." Diana took the handkerchief, the rough, clean fabric against her sensitive skin, wiping away the salty trail left by the barista's cruelty. She sniffled, trying to catch her breath, adjusting the brim of her MAGA hat that had gone crooked in the confusion. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, her voice still thick but now loaded with deep gratitude. I thought I was alone." "You are never alone, my dear," replied the veteran, rising with the help of his cane, assuming his stature as a living monument again. He swept his gaze across the coffee shop one more time. The atmosphere had changed drastically. Where there was hostility and mocking laughter before, now there was a heavy, reverent silence tinged with shame. Cell phones had disappeared into pockets. Faces, previously lit by the arrogance of social justice, were now lowered, unable to face the shine of that man's medals. Reality had invaded the ideological bubble. The store manager, still pale and visibly shaken by the near PR catastrophe and the moral weight of the reprimand he received, approached cautiously. He didn't just bring apologies, he brought a peace offering, desperately trying to salvage the establishment's dignity. "Sir, miss," he began, wringing his hands nervously, on behalf of Starbucks and this team, I would like to apologize sincerely. Jessica's behavior was unacceptable. This does not reflect our corporate values." The veteran raised a hand, stopping the empty corporate speech. "Values aren't written in company manuals, son. Values are lived. They are demonstrated when it's hard, not when it's convenient." He looked at the manager sternly. "You let a wolf watch the sheep. But let's correct this now. The girl wanted a hot cocoa. Bring it. The biggest one you have, with extra whipped cream. And bring a black coffee for me. No sugar, no foam, no fancy names. Just coffee. And we are going to drink this sitting at that table over there, with the dignity any American citizen deserves." The manager nodded frantically, relieved by the chance for redemption. "Right away, sir. It's on the house. Please, sit." The veteran offered his arm to Diana, like a gentleman from a forgotten era taking a lady to a ball. "Come, Diana, let's claim our territory." Together, they walked to the best table in the shop, by the sunny window. As they passed the tables, something extraordinary happened. It started with a solitary sound, a slow clapping. It was a middle-aged man, wearing work clothes, who had quietly entered during the confusion. Then, an elderly woman reading a newspaper joined him, and then, surprisingly, one of the college students. The same one who had mocked earlier closed his laptop and began to clap, perhaps moved by a sudden realization of his own generation's cowardice before that man's bravery. The applause grew, shy at first, then stronger, filling the space. It wasn't a thunderous stadium ovation, but it was the sound of collective conscience waking up. Good had defeated evil there, in that small arena of coffee and Wi-Fi. Seated at the table, with the sun illuminating the veteran's noble profile and making Diana's golden hair shine like a halo, the old warrior took off his military cover and placed it respectfully on the table. He sighed, a long sound that carried the weariness of 90 years, but his eyes remained vigilant. The drinks arrived quickly, served by the manager himself with servile humility. As Diana held the hot mug with both hands, feeling the warmth return to her body, she looked at her savior. "Why did she hate me so much?" asked Diana, the innocence in her voice cutting the old soldier's heart. "She doesn't even know me. She said I was a fascist, that my hat was violent." The veteran took a sip of his black coffee, bitter and strong, like the truth. He looked deeply into the girl's eyes. "She doesn't hate you, Diana. She hates what you represent, and she hates it because she has been taught to fear what she cannot control." He pointed to the flag on her t-shirt. "See, that flag. It represents absolute freedom, the freedom to fail, the freedom to succeed, the freedom to worship God and not the state. People like her, the radical leftists, they want the state to be God. They want to control what you say, what you eat, what you think. When they see someone like you, young, happy, patriotic and free, it terrifies them, because your joy proves their miserable ideology is a lie. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial and sacred tone. They called me a fascist today. Me, who watched my brothers, 18-year-old boys from Kansas, from Texas, from Brooklyn, die in the cold sand of Europe to destroy fascism. They use these words as weapons because they have no arguments. They have anger, we have truth. They have screams, we have history. Diana absorbed every word. The confusion in her mind began to dissipate, replaced by a precocious and powerful understanding. She wasn't the problem. She was the resistance. I was afraid no one would come, she confessed. Fear is natural, said the veteran, lightly touching her hand. I was afraid when the boat ramp dropped at Omaha. I was afraid in the forests of the Ardennes. But courage isn't the absence of fear, Diana. Courage is seeing fear, acknowledging it, adjusting your hat, and moving forward because you know what you stand for is more important than your safety. He smiled, and the wrinkles around his eyes deepened. And today, you held your position. You didn't take off the hat. You didn't kneel. To me, that makes you a hero as much as any man I served with. The praise made Diana's heart swell. Being called a hero by that man was the greatest honor she could imagine. The hot cocoa had never tasted so sweet. It was the taste of victory. They finished their drinks in quiet companionship, 2 generations of Americans united against the tide of modern madness. When they got up to leave, the coffee shop stopped again. This time, there were no insults, no looks of disdain. There was respect. The veteran put his cover back on, adjusting it with millimeter precision. He took his cane and, with Diana by his side, walked toward the exit. The orange-haired leftist was nowhere to be seen. She remained hidden in the back, huddled in her defeat, unable to face the light they radiated. As they passed through the glass door and stepped out onto the sun-drenched sidewalk, the fresh autumn air seemed to wash away the last remnants of that place's toxicity. The world outside looked brighter, more vibrant. The veteran stopped at the corner, where city traffic passed oblivious to the drama that had just occurred. He turned to Diana. "Are you going home now?" he asked. "I'm going to the library to study history," replied Diana, with a new sparkle in her eyes. "I want to know everything about what you guys did. I want to be able to defend my country with words, just like you did, sir." The veteran smiled, a smile of mission accomplished. "That is the best revenge, my young lady. Learn. Educate yourself. Be strong. They can scream, they can cancel, they can try to erase us, but as long as there are young people like you carrying the torch, America will never fall." Then, in a final gesture that would seal that meeting in eternity, the old warrior let go of his cane, letting it hang by the strap on his wrist. He straightened his painful spine, ignoring age, ignoring time, and raised his right hand in a perfect, crisp, solemn salute. It wasn't a salute to a superior officer. It was a salute to the future. A greeting from a guardian of the past to the guardian of tomorrow. Diana, heart beating strong in her chest, mimicked the gesture. Her small hand rose to her forehead, brushing the brim of the MAGA hat. She stood tall, proud, a little statue of liberty on the street corner. "Semper Fi, little patriot," he said. "Thank you, sir," she replied. The veteran turned and began to walk down the street, his imposing figure slowly diminishing in the distance, but his shadow casting long and protective over the sidewalk. Diana stood there watching him until he turned the corner. She wasn't crying anymore. She wasn't afraid. She adjusted her backpack, raised her chin, and walked toward the library. Inside the coffee shop, the leftist might have screamed, but outside of it, in the real world, freedom had won. Justice had been done, and the little MAGA girl knew with absolute certainty that traditional values, honor, and truth would always triumph over hate, no matter how loud tyranny screamed. America was safe, guarded in the heart of an old soldier and in the hands of a girl with a red hat.